Chapter 18. My Great Mistake. The day before Christmas, in the year I made my initial success in selling carpet sweepers by letters, Mr. M.R. Ditzel, president of the company, called me to his office. He said, "I have some advice to give you. You have many of the qualifications which make for success, including the selling instinct. You are too good a man to work for me. You shall start out for yourself, as I did." He told me something of his history, how he had refused every salary offer, every safe anchorage, and struggled alone, and how, as a result, he had finally arrived on the road to fortune. He ended by saying, "I am selfish enough to want you to stay here. If you do, your salary will be much increased next year. But I am fair enough to advise you not to stay. Don't let someone else glean the chief profits from your hard work and your talent." My Scotch conservatism led me to stay. It was my great mistake. Soon after that, I married, and any venture of my own became increasingly difficult. Thus, I tied myself to a lifetime of service as an employee. I watched some of my coworkers start out for themselves, largely on lines I had taught them. Fred Macy started selling furniture by mail. In a few months, he had an office force of 90 to handle the business he developed. Then he founded the Fred Macy Company, which exists today. A.W. Shaw started building office systems. Then he founded the magazine System, which has been an enormous success. My roommate, E.H. Stafford, left his position to manufacture school furniture and built up the E.H. Stafford Company. I feel now, as then, that I was fully as well equipped as they were, save with courage. I have been called on to do bigger things for others than they have done for themselves. But I always envied their independence, which I spent 35 years to attain. I have helped a good many men to wealth and position. In most cases, they started practically without money. The advertising had to earn its way. It was the chief factor in the business, often the only reason for success. In most mail-order lines, that is evident. It is true in many other lines. It is not difficult to make a breakfast food, a toothpaste, medicine, soap, or cleanser. Most advertisers at the start employ others to make them. Salesmen can aid but little. They are usually not employed. About everything depends on the advertising. I have told how such products are tested out in a small way at the start. The advertising man does 9/10 of the work. The owner of the trademark ventures little or nothing. If the test falls down, the advertising man is the main loser. He has spent his time and talents. If the test succeeds and the advertising extends, the advertising man gets a commission on the expenditures. The profits go to others. The advertising man, because he is anonymous, fails to even get due credit. The business grows and the owners grow with it in wealth and in pride. As it grows, the advertising man becomes less and less important. The business acquires a momentum. The time comes when even mediocre advertising will keep it going upward. Advertising which could never have started it. The advertising man clings to the methods he established. He fears to change. As a matter of fact, it is seldom wise to change. The best way to win new customers is usually the way that won millions. But the advertising becomes monotonous to the men who read every ad. They always come to want something new. So the man who builds a big advertising account is pretty sure to lose it, soon or late. To keep up his volume and his earnings, he must always be starting new ventures. I gradually came to specialize on proprietaries and foods, on products which people buy over and over. They offer the great opportunities in advertising. One-sale articles are not so inviting. The profit must be made on that sale. Articles of that kind appeal to the minority. The advertising man's great profits come from products which appeal to nearly every home, and which must be advertised forever. Food products, for instance, which mothers teach their children to use, and which never should go out of favor. But such products must be developed. The process is often slow. The advertising man has the major share of the work and responsibility. When he works for others, as I worked for 35 years, He gets no fair share of the profits, and he rarely becomes a permanent factor so far as his work is concerned. I have often figured what I would have made had I invested just my commissions in the stock of enterprises which I fostered. The amount runs into many millions. The real reason I did not is the fact that I never had sufficient confidence in myself. But I pretended to ignore commercialism. My creative work lay in a higher sphere, so for many years I watched others make money while I gained mainly a modicum of fame. An ambitious wife was the one who woke me from that lethargy. She had desires for which money counted more than fame. She pointed out how those who employed me always gained the advantage in a monetary way. Finally, I considered her viewpoint, and after many years of working for others, I started to work for myself. I have already made more by sharing the profits of my creations than I ever made by working on commission. One of my first ventures was in Pepsodent toothpaste. I bought a share in that, for which I paid $13,000. It paid me some $200,000 in dividends. Then I sold the stock for $500,000. Then I decided at a time in life when most men wish to retire that I would do what Mr. Ditzel advised me to do when I was 21. I would work for myself, start my own enterprises, and win or fail with them. I had many ideas in mind. The first one I started was a cosmetic business. I had studied statistics on that line. I learned that women spent $700 million yearly on cosmetics, more than they spent on all other advertised lines combined. I prepared a line of cosmetics, but I had no theory. The field was overcrowded. Leading dealers in cosmetics had thousands of kinds on their shelves. Scores of new makers came every week to solicit them. No line dominated. When a woman became converted to one product and went to a store to get it, she faced a dozen demonstrators who tried to sell other lines. I sent men to Paris and Vienna to secure something unique, some claims to give me an advantage, but they found none, so I decided to abandon this line. Just at that time, Edna Wallace Hopper played an engagement in Chicago. One morning, Mandel Brothers announced in the papers that she would appear in person that afternoon in their beauty department on the 4th floor. I sent an emissary there, and she found the floor crowded. Every other department on the floor had to yield its space to accommodate the women who flocked to see Miss Hopper. Edna Wallace Hopper had attained a grandmother's age. Many of the older women had seen her in her prime back in the early 90s. She met them looking like a girl of 19, with hair, figure, and complexion like a debutante's. Every woman, of course, was anxious to learn the secrets of her youth and beauty. The manager of Mandel's advised her to call on me. He said, "You should capitalize that fame of yours. You should teach other women to do what you have done." The next day, Edna Wallace Hopper called on me. She brought with her countless articles which had been published about her. Also, many pages she had written herself on this subject of youth extension. That day, I found my theory. Here was a woman, the most talked about woman in America, a woman who had made herself a famous beauty 35 years ago, a woman who had kept that beauty to a grand old age. And all through Beauty Helps, she had searched the whole world to discover. I made a contract with her. She was to give me her formulas, her name, and prestige. I was to prepare those products for other women exactly as she used them. She had spent fortunes to secure those formulas. She was the most prominent example living of what Beauty Helps could do. On those lines, we have founded a large cosmetic business. We have never had a salesman. We have never asked a dealer to buy. We have confined our efforts to the consumer. We have tried to win women's respect for the research Miss Hopper has conducted. Then we have let those women induce dealers to supply them. A great many makers starting out try to sell their products 2 and 3 times over. They try to sell the wholesaler, and the wholesaler today wants some 10%. He can do nothing for us save to fill the orders that we bring. He quotes his business expense, largely made up of efforts to get business from his competitors. He wants us to pay our share, though it matters not in the slightest to us from whom a dealer buys. His salesman can do nothing for us. The retailer tries to profit to the utmost from every new adventurer. Send a salesman to him, and he is bound to demand some advantage. He wants a dozen free and 10, or some extra profit. Any such concession is a handicap, hard to overcome. Your whole success depends on the consumer. If the consumer is induced to demand what you offer, the dealer will obtain it. If the dealer wants it, the wholesaler will supply it. Many of the wrecks in advertising come from trying to sell things over and over. One first sells to the jobber, and he demands a large percentage. Then he tries to sell to the retailer. He wants free goods and extra margins. Yet all the results depend on the consumer. All your wholesale demand, all your retail demand depends on your influence with the consumer. Never forget that. Jobbers and retailers have their own brands. What trade they can influence is never directed toward products you control. They are not trying to give you a whip hold. If they can influence sales, they make 4 times as much on products of their own. In that fact lies one of the most pitiful phases in advertising adventures. The advertiser spends his money to convert consumers. Then he pays salesmen to sell his goods to jobbers and to retailers. He gives concessions and inducements just to get them to supply the demand he creates. As a result, there is little left for him, and he must pay all the expenses. One can never win out in that way. It is like a man who tries to do business with excessive overhead. He bears the expense, the risk, and the effort, and his profits are dissipated. Today, the Edna Wallace Hopper line embraces 23 products. Each is a formula Miss Hopper has discovered. When a woman tries one of them, she desires to try the rest. The converts to Miss Hopper are converts to her line. So our average in this line is $1.78 per sale. That is compared with 50 cents for a toothpaste, 35 cents for a shaving cream, 10 cents for a soap, etc. Our profit on what we sell from our advertising would never pay the cost. But one thing sells another. That is so in many lines. The whole profit comes in auxiliaries. This is one of many enterprises I have started in this new regime. Some will fail, but the failures will cost us a trifle. Had I failed for the other fellow, they would have cost just as much. The successes will win millions. So that is my future. Instead of confining myself to building businesses for others on a temporary commission, I have started for myself the enterprises which seem to promise profit. If even one turns out as scores have turned out under my direction, it will win me more than I ever won from writing. But this is not, as I well realize, good advice to the majority. The average man should work under direction. Success depends on many qualities, of which he has but few. My present adventure is made after decades of working in cooperation. Let those who can deduce from this experience suggestion and direction. I have tried to point out the only ways to success in advertising. Those ways lead in many directions. Let each one decide what is best.